To those who engaged in the acts of violence and destruction, you do not represent our country.
Now at 11, condemning the violent mob that stormed the U.S. Capitol building, President Trump speaking in sharp contrast to his own rhetoric in the wake of the presidential election, urging calm tonight and coming just shy of offering a concession.
You unleashed an all-out assault on our institutions of our democracy.
The president is unmoored from reality and from his oath.
The Congress may be prepared to move forward with impeachment.
Plus, loyalties tested as the president faces growing calls for his removal, some from his own party and inside his own administration. Thank you so much for joining us tonight at 11. I'm Natalie Pascarella.
And I'm David Usry. As we join you tonight, Donald Trump is the president of the United States, but the list of resignations in response to the insurrection is growing. Less than 2 hours ago, Education Secretary Betsy DeVos became the second cabinet member to step down today, in addition to others within the Trump administration. Also facing fallout, members of the pro-Trump mob now under the national microscope as D.C. police and the FBI launch a nationwide search for everyone who stormed the U.S. Capitol. News 4's Checkey Beckford joins us now from Washington, D.C. to kick off our team coverage just a day, Checkey, after that unprecedented violence.
Well, David, all's quiet at the Capitol tonight, now surrounded by a 7-foot fence expected to be up for the next 30 days. Also, as you mentioned, new resignations announced tonight from the White House as more and more staffers try to distance themselves from the president.
To those who engaged in the acts of violence and destruction, you do not represent our country. And to those who broke the law, you will pay.
In a scripted speech released on Twitter tonight, President Trump condemning the siege 24 hours after speaking fondly of rioters who ransacked the Capitol.
So go home. We love you. You're very special.
Tonight's speech now promising a smooth transition of power.
He unleashed an all-out assault on our institutions of our democracy from the outset. And yesterday was but the culmination of that unrelenting attack.
While at least 55 suspects are now facing federal charges and facial recognition being used to find others involved, many, including the president-elect, lay the blame for inciting the rioters at the president's feet. A handful of members of his own party also speaking out. Even staunch supporter Senator Ted Cruz, who echoed the president's false claims of election fraud, is now placing some of the blame on the president for what happened yesterday.
Plainly bears some responsibility. At the end of the day, criminals are responsible for their own conduct, but I think his angry rhetoric was reckless, and I think it was harmful.
Former Attorney General Bill Barr blasting the president's conduct as a betrayal of his office and supporters. Meanwhile, members of the president's administration are jumping ship.
I can't stay here. Not after yesterday. You can't look at that yesterday and think I want to be a part of that in any way, shape, or form.
Resignations include Transportation Secretary Elaine Chao, the First Lady's Chief of Staff, and the Deputy National Security Advisor. Members of Congress also holding Capitol Police responsible, questioning how the mob was able to bypass officers and overtake the building.
We were literally almost taken over by these rioters, domestic terrorists.
It could have been prevented, and it should never have been allowed to occur.
And this evening, Capitol Police Chief Stephen Sund announced his resignation after a growing call from lawmakers for him to do so. We're live in D.C. tonight. Checkey Beckford, News 4, New York.
Checkey, thank you. And tonight we're learning more about the 4 people who died during Wednesday's siege at the Capitol. Police identified Ashley Babbitt as the woman who shot as the mob tried to break through a barricaded door. Family members say that she was an Air Force veteran from San Diego. Now, 3 others died of medical emergencies, including social media website Trumparoo founder Benjamin Phillips, who died of a stroke. Roseanne Boyland of Georgia collapsed during the riot and later died at the hospital. And family members say Kevin Greason of Alabama died from a heart attack. David.
And Natalie, as Checkey reported, many believe the blood of those victims is on President Trump's hands. His role in Wednesday's events not only under intense scrutiny, but also raising an alarm over what he might do during his final days in office. Tonight, more than 100 members of Congress, almost exclusively Democrats, are now calling for the president's removal, either through impeachment or by invoking the 25th Amendment, which has not been done before. News 4's Ida Siegal continues our team coverage tonight with the steps necessary to make that happen. Ida?
Yes, David, there's been lots of talk about the 25th Amendment and or impeachment over in D.C. and here in New York, quite frankly. But constitutional experts say it's not as easy as it may seem. It's moments like this and this that has leaders around the country calling for President Trump's removal from office. Senator Chuck Schumer, one of the loudest voices among them.
He may have only 13 days left as president, but yesterday demonstrated that each and every one of those days is a threat to democracy so long as he is in power.
Schumer is leaning on Vice President Mike Pence to invoke the 25th Amendment, which would declare the president unable to carry out his duties, an idea many of Schumer's constituents here in New York support.
I think the 25th Amendment is not a bad idea.
I think we will have more riots if he continues to stay in office for the next 2 weeks. So if we can get him out now, we should.
But the 25th has never been used for that purpose before. It would require the vice president and at least 8 of the 15 cabinet secretaries to agree. And even then, the president could object, which would kick it back to Congress, and a supermajority would be needed for it to pass.
If the vice president and the cabinet do not act, the Congress may be prepared to move forward with impeachment. That is the overwhelming sentiment of my caucus.
But impeaching the president a second time also presents challenges, not the least of which is time. It's unlikely it could happen before the inauguration.
Those are really tools that do not work very quickly or well.
But at this point, over 200 lawmakers have called for action, including one Republican.
The president is unmoored from reality and from his oath.
And sources tell NBC News there have been conversations at the staff level in the White House about invoking the 25th Amendment. But Senator Schumer said today that when he tried to call Vice President Pence and ask him about it, he was unable to get through to the vice president. Reporting live from the Upper East Side, Ida Siegal, News 4, New York.
All right, Ida, thank you for that report. And while President Trump remains in office, U.S. Capitol Police Chief Stephen Sund plans to resign amid criticism of the department's response to that riot. Sund has already promised a thorough review of security procedures after the department's 2,000-member force fell back as crowds invaded the halls of Congress. Now, tonight, some lawmakers are noting the stark contrast to the forceful response to Black Lives Matter protests. News 4's Chris Glorioso continuing our team coverage with what some call, Chris, a double standard.
The ransacking of the Capitol is a shameful moment in American history, but was it also a predictable one? Tonight, the police response to this riot is not only being called grossly inadequate, it's being called evidence of a racial double standard.
I am calling for the resignation of the chief of the Capitol Police.
House Speaker Pelosi said you don't need a top-to-bottom review to know the Capitol Police leadership bungled its one job. With 4 people dead, including a pro-Trump rioter shot at the doors of the legislative chamber.
A woman died out there tonight.
Lawmakers now turn their attention to how the rioters made it inside our nation's most sacred hall of democracy. John Jay College crowd control expert Brian Higgins said Capitol Police were utterly outnumbered, and they appeared to have missed or ignored clear signs the demonstration could get out of hand.
We now know that there are social media posts that indicated there would be violence, that there would be those who wanted to push the issue here.
The Capitol Police Chief issued a statement saying his officers responded valiantly, but some of them were on neighboring streets responding to 2 live pipe bombs when the insurrectionists broke in. There has been no explanation for why Capitol Police didn't ask for the National Guard backup in advance of the massive Trump demonstration.
There were discussions previously with the Capitol Police and others, and no request of the D.C. National Guard were made.
It was a stark difference from the George Floyd protest this summer when the National Guard pushed demonstrators back so President Trump could have a photo op.
This just goes to the difference in America between how Black Americans are treated when they are in protest and how white Americans are treated when they are a part of protest.
The Capitol Police Force includes 2,300 members. The department has a budget of more than $460 million. And tonight, some are asking why the doors to the Capitol weren't better fortified, considering the public hasn't been allowed in the building for months because of the pandemic. Chris Glorioso, News 4 New York.
And protests tonight within the 5 boroughs. In Brooklyn, crowds of protesters gathered to call for President Trump's removal from office.
Those drums, part of a steady beat that filled the streets outside of the Barclays Center. Hundreds of people showed up tonight, outraged by yesterday's assault on the Capitol. Now, the peaceful protesters gathered close together despite the pandemic, mostly all masked. They took to the streets chanting anti-Trump messages. They marched past Senator Chuck Schumer's Brooklyn apartment as well. Many want the president out of the office through impeachment or the 25th Amendment.
I think people have to make their voices heard that this is unacceptable, and he has to be removed from office. He's a danger to this country and was literally a danger to many lives yesterday.
Now, the protests were carried out peacefully, as we said, and no word of any arrests tonight. We are going to stay on top of this fallout from the Capitol siege, following every update around the clock for you. You can always find those updates on NBCNewYork.com, also by downloading our free NBC4 New York app, Dave.